Okay, folks, we are back. Nightmare Success and Out listeners, I am very excited with my guest that I have today. I think you could actually call Travis Richey the prison czar of education. I have looked at all the different things that he's doing, but he is the man behind Accomplished Ventures, the largest prison content provider in the United States. Uh, it basically just, I mean, what it does is what we need. You know, the thing that we talk about on this show is what happens when your worst fear becomes your reality. How do you adapt? How do you survive? How do you overcome? And Travis has done all that. And what he's doing is he's putting life skills, education, job skills, entrepreneurial skills, and financial literacy, and giving inmates hope. They're in the prison, right as we speak, hope that provides them a chance to get their lives fixed up, to get back into society with more than they came in with. And he's got 750,000 tablets that are out in the prison world, and it's loaded with this curriculum, and it is just fantastic. And when he said he could come on, Travis has helped me, hopefully here in the next couple of weeks, get into this tablet system with Nightmare Success, which I'm really excited about. Travis, welcome in.
Happy to be here, brother. Yeah, and I'm excited for you to get the Nightmare of Success alongside my content and a whole bunch of other really enriching content. There's not enough positive, real world conversation and solutions to a lot of the guys and gals behind bars. So I'm excited for you to go down this path with us.
What I think is really incredible about your story is, and we're going to get into this, but you did a couple of years running a hedge fund. You get into that regulatory world, and you fall into a deep hole, and there you are. But when you went into that world, you saw things and said, "Oh my God, this needs to be better." And this hasn't even been a decade yet for you, and you are the man on the move. Walk me back a little bit, Travis. Like, I know you came from the East Coast and the Boston world. What was life like for you growing up as a kid?
Man, I had the tale of two cities growing up as a kid. I was raised in a religious and a spiritual household, and had a mother she's still alive, have a mother that really raised us with an incredible work ethic and wanted us to be proud of where we came from, and to look nice when we left the home, and to open doors for women. And at the same time, I went to bed on most nights with a father that was high on heroin. Many nights my dad would kind of loom at the doorway. We had a basement home, and my father would stand in the doorway with a loaded .357 revolver in front of my sister's room. And we had trundle beds, and we would sleep in there together just out of fear. So growing up, it was an interesting dichotomy, trying to figure out what a dad really is supposed to be, what he's supposed to offer to you, while at the same time we had a mom that couldn't be more perfect, on the straight and narrow path, really doing her best, working multiple jobs once they separated, to really make sure that us kids had everything. So I would say that my childhood was fantastic. As I look back on it, my childhood taught me a bunch of stuff. My example that I had in my father taught me what I didn't want to be as a dad.
Interesting. So you had a sister. Was it a younger sister?
I have three sisters.
Oh, three sisters. So you, wow. Where do you fall into that line?
I have one older and two younger, and that's the same makeup that my wife and I have. My wife and I have one son. His name's Brock, and then we have three daughters: Kennedy, Addison, and Paisley.
Okay, so you guys figured that out. I have three daughters, and I never did figure out the boy thing. So I did get two grandsons all at once, twins, from my oldest daughter here about 4 months ago. So yeah, I'm now getting into this, Travis. Yeah, that's good.
Fun. Yes, indeed, that's fun.
So in that world that you were living, that seems like a lot for a kid to take on. Was your mom with your dad in the situation that he was in? did she try to cover that up, or was it just this is what
Yeah.
the hand I've been dealt, and kids, I'm going to take care of everything, or what? How did that all work in the household?
Yeah. I think my mom did the best that she had with the resources that she had at the time, like
Yeah.
we all do. And when my mom tried to hide it, tried to cover it up. I don't think anybody really wants to be proud, especially going back 20, 25 years. Nobody
Hmm.
wants to be proud about a drug addict as a spouse. And it was also an era thing. My mom's generation, and I've spoken with a lot of my friends. My mom's generation was one that really didn't talk about problems.
Hmm.
Therapy, is kind of a four-letter word. And I think that a lot of that contributed to her lack of resourcefulness. I think that there may have been more people in today's world that might be more apt to help her,
Hmm.
even from a church, or a religious perspective. But, going back 20, 25 years, it was a time where everything was, not everything, that's an exaggeration, but a lot of things were really swept under the rug and not spoken about in public.
So, what were your school years like? Were they was that an escape for you, or because I know you're a smart guy and you did I think you maybe even went on a scholarship to college. So, how did your school years work?
Yeah, school was definitely an escape. It was a time that I could excel in something. It was a place that I could feel belonged. I was heavily involved in extracurricular activities. From a young age. Boxing and hockey and football and all the usuals. That
Hmm.
come with like a really fun childhood. But we would go home to very like a ton of chaos, a lot of uncertainty. It was a very physically and emotionally and substance abused household. And it was, as anybody knows who lives with an addict, a drug addict of that capacity or that caliber. um, when it's good, it's really good because they're usually really remorseful.
Yeah.
And when it's bad, it is some of the ugliest times that you've ever seen. And so I really grew up, and I tell people now, my father was one of the most violent individuals I've ever met in my life, ever.
Mm. Towards you,
He didn't
or
really
just
come with a,
in general,
towards
or
me and towards everybody in general. Yeah, yeah. I
yeah.
saw my father get violent at the drop of many, many hats. On the turnpikes in Boston, in the middle of a Circle K, on a football field for Pop Warner, in the middle of a church basketball game. My dad was just his 0 to 100 went faster than anybody I'd ever seen, and he was a very large man. He worked out, he was in shape, he was a very big guy, and so that didn't help. And the temperament, it went 0 to 100, and when it did, it was ugly. And so childhood was very much that way. When you came home from school and you saw dad's car there, dad's truck there, it was like, okay, you got that butterfly. I can even feel it now as I talk
Mm.
about it. You got that butterfly of emotions. Like, which one are we getting when we walk inside here? Is it all good or is it all sorts of bad?
Wow. And so how long did your mom and dad stay together?
My parents were together for about 20 years.
Okay.
It's a
Yeah.
long time. Yeah, long time. She finally got the courage, and you know, uh, maybe courage is the wrong word, but she finally got the courage and the ability to leave him and to forge her own path and do her own thing. And sad to say, I don't really think that she's ever recovered from those years. She still, hasn't remarried and has a lot of trauma that's still associated from all of those years past, which is really a sad thing for me to witness.
Mm. So tell me a little bit about, so you high school, you're playing sports, you're doing all those things, and then I think you end up at
Yep.
University of Miami. Is that where you went?
I went and got a degree. Yeah, I went and got a degree in finance. Prior to that, yeah, graduated from high school. Like I said, enjoyed school and went on a mission for my church. Spent 2 years in the Pacific Northwest area and enjoyed that. Enjoyed teaching, enjoyed serving, enjoyed learning about myself, and then came back, and immediately dove in to the financial services industry and knew that that was a place that I had always wanted to be. I felt like it was also an era. You remember those good days, the days of like Wall Street, the Gordon Gekko movies. It
Yes.
was a time that I felt like I could write my own ticket. It was something that I was naturally good at. I was, and still am, gifted to put a deal together. I am a very unemotional, data-driven individual when it comes to business. And I like to say I'm industry agnostic.
Yeah.
If it pencils, then I'm interested. That's really the long and the short of it. And so I knew I needed to be involved in that financial services industry, and being involved with people and buying small businesses and working with funds on mergers and acquisitions. All of that really just spoke naturally to me. And so I had a really, really good success. We were managing millions of dollars, and I was 24, 25 years old.
Young kid. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I think that's fun when that happens, when you're that age. I remember I was in my 20s and big things happening. Looking back on it now, and you think about 22, 24 years old, and you get success at that age. It's a lot of fun.
Oh man, it was a lot of fun. Oh yeah, there was a lot of toys. There was a lot of trips. It was a lot of fun. It was.
So how did you meet up? Is this time period where you got married and did all those things that you do in your 20s? Yeah.
Yeah, I did. Yeah. My wife and I, we met. My wife Melissa and I, we met. Goodness, 15 years ago at a church event, and we had mutual friends. Her sister knew a buddy that I had gone to school with, and so it was kind of fortuitous. We were at the right place at the right time, and it was kind of a Beauty and the Beast moment that I like to say. It is. No, it really is. Like it is. My wife comes from a perfect upbringing, and her parents will probably listen to this and hate me for saying it, but and I say that from my perspective, right? I know nothing is perfect and nobody's perfect, but you've got two parents who are good, upstanding citizens who never abused themselves or anybody else, who are great members of society, who make good money, who are married after 40 years. Like, there's a lot of good things. A lot of good there,
yeah.
So I look at her upbringing in a very small town, where her dad was the mayor. Like life was really, really perfect. And then you kind of compare and contrast to me, the Beast, and you go, hey, so you're not gonna get to meet my dad.
I meant to ask you what happened. What happened, Travis? With I kind of left that off there. So your mom and dad split, but is that relationship with your father, was that kind of an over and done with thing, or did he stay in your life?
He tried to stay in for quite some time, even up until he died about 18 months ago. And unfortunately, he could never get rid of those demons. And so for him to be around me was a liability.
You probably had a little PTSD from all those feelings too, from growing up.
Constant liability, and we would get into it on the phone. He would call, and then when he wouldn't get his way, he would become threatening. And then obviously, now I'm my age and my size and and so then it wasn't a positive experience. It was really, really tumultuous. And so, I knew I couldn't have him around my little ones. I definitely didn't want him around my children, anything that would bring that negativity in. So, no, he kind of, he chose some really dark ways, ended up really hurting a lot of people, physically, and and then went away for quite some period of time, and then we got news that he passed away, that he died about, like I said, about a year and a half ago.
Wow, it's not that long ago.
No.
So Travis, walk me into how this nightmare happened for you, because you're rolling along, you're doing all these things, you're figuring out everything's acquisitions and doing deals and negotiating, life's good, and then how does it happen?
Man, a knock on the door changes the world.
Yeah.
I had two gentlemen knock on my front door, and they were both in suits, and they asked who I was, told them who I was, and then they gave me what looked like an unbound thesaurus. It was that big, and it was paper, gigantic, and it was my indictment. And this is where we all have our own stories, and so much of it is just so hard to believe, right? It's just crazy. And this is where I was so naive. Keep in mind, I've already set the stage, very successful, and we had done very well. And so I looked down at this paper and I'm like, well, who's this who's this lawyer? Who's this, assistant attorney
Right.
general think
Right.
he
Some
is?
civil suit. Right.
Right. And so I actually jumped in my car and I drove down to his office. And I'm like, this is just a misunderstanding. This is goofy. This can't be it. And I was met with police officers and a woman behind bulletproof glass who told me, number one, you're not talking to the ad individual that just indicted you, and number two, this is not a misunderstanding. You should definitely go and get legal counsel.
Wow. So,
And
Travis, what's going through your mind at that moment?
well, I mean, the first thing you do is you go to Google and you're like, what the heck is this? I mean,
Mhm.
What is a grand jury indictment?
Mhm.
And then you get like 30% fact and like 70% of like angry people on the internet's opinions
Mhm.
that are unhelpful. And that's where I learned the phrase that you could indict a ham sandwich.
Well,
Um,
and Travis, that's a point that I think a lot of people actually do not understand, because constitutionally we think you've got your defense and you've got the prosecution, and both
yes.
present their side. Actually, that doesn't happen in a grand jury.
Nope.
Only one side is presented, no other side is heard. And that's why people say you can indict a ham sandwich, because there is no other side. There is a group of people that are held as your jury, your grand jury, and then the prosecutor comes in and presents their case.
Yes. Yes. It is so hard. It's so hard to believe. And I remember when I finally did get my defense attorney, I remember he sat down. The first thing he told me, as he explained that to me, like you just did so well, he said, if the general public knew this, there would be blood in the streets. Because it's what you think, it's what we see. You two individuals who are usually calm, cool, and collected, both are attorneys. They go and they present dual sides. The judge, who really is agnostic to the situation, says, let me look at the facts, bing, bang, boom. We're not going to split the baby down. No, 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 no. No, quite literally, they summon a group of individuals behind closed doors and they paint any picture that they want. And the picture that they have to paint to indict you is so tiny. All they
Right.
truly have
Low
to say
bar.
is, oh my goodness gracious. In order to be indicted where I was, you only had to be a resident of the county and to have obtained a financial instrument. So any bank account, any savings account, any wire transfer in that county, that was my low bar to be indicted, for them to actually come in and blow the doors off of my entire operation. Did you have a bank account and did you live here? What? Okay, here we go. So that was it. That was my knock on the door, changed everything. And not to gloss over all of the sultry and salacious details, but once you're in that blender, it's very difficult to get out. You are dealing with a justice system that looks at a low bar and says he was indicted. The good citizens of said county did indict him, and therefore we should move forward to a trial to let more citizens, because the judge goes, I don't want anything to do with this. And this is where in comes your defense counsel, where they say this is not a good thing to go to trial, because most people will look at this and do exactly what the judge just did. Well, the people before me said so. The evidence said so, so I'm going to say so, and I'm going to go home.
Mm-hmm.
And that was what started a years long legal battle between myself and the state of Arizona, of which I lost.
So you're married, you have kids, and how did that all play into your world?
Great question. So towards the end, my wife was just pregnant with our first one. Towards the end of this whole nightmare, right before I had gone in and been sentenced. And there came a point where I was so exhausted.
Mm-hmm.
To kind of give the people, to paint a real picture without sounding like a total wimp, every 30 days, I had a court appearance in the same courtroom. Up until this point, keep in mind, my transaction was from quarter 4 of 2006. This is now 2010, 2011, January 2012. I had never been arrested. I'd never been put in handcuffs. I'd never been served time in jail. And so there's a weird dichotomy there for people who haven't experienced that, because once you get put in the back of a cop car and go to jail, there's something, it's tangible, right?
Mm-hmm.
But every 30 days, I'd walk into a courtroom and we would argue, the state would argue, and then the judge would say, we're moving this forward. And that was it. That was it. And so it was what I learned quickly was that 2 hours of argument soon cost me about $3,500 every time I walked in.
Mm-hmm.
But it was like that PTSD that you mentioned earlier, because I'd pull up, I'd park in the same spot, I'd put the quarters in the meter, I'd go through the metal detector, I'd be in my suit, I'd walk in, I'd have so much anxiety. You know, you're sick before, you're vomiting blood the night before, you can't eat, but then you binge eat. You go through this whole thing. And then you're supposed to be lucid enough to answer conversational questions about what happened 54 months ago.
Right.
And on top of that, you then get an invoice in your email before you even get back to the car for another 10 grand.
Right.
I was exhausted. I was mentally, physically, emotionally, financially, spiritually exhausted. And I told my wife, I remember I was sitting on the ground one night in our living room, and I said, whatever comes from this can't be as bad as what this is.
Mm-hmm. I think
And
that, Travis,
this was,
I think, Travis, what you just said there is something that I mean, I get goosebumps listening to your story because it gives me PTSD, but you do get physically, emotionally, spiritually exhausted to where I think you run on adrenaline for so long because you're fighting. You know, you get up and it's about the fight. You go to bed and you can't hardly sleep because it's about the fight. But eventually you get to that point. It's like, God, I just want this over with. I don't know how much further I can go with this.
I want it over with. And we were reading this book at the time, and it was called Come What May and Love It. And I remember that book, you know, I don't remember the entire book, the entirety of it, but I remember the overarching theme was like, if God is in control, then come what may and love it. And that's when I told Melissa, I said, like, I mean, I just can't do this anymore. The details, I'll give you a couple fun stories for folks that are out there listening. The behind the scenes work that goes into like high profile white collar crimes is stuff that obviously makes it to the news, right? And there was a time where I walked into my attorney's office and he said, hey, we've got a good opportunity here to get rid of a boatload of charges. And that is going to require us to bring on this additional attorney, because that attorney is actually one of the representatives for the incoming Attorney General's campaign. And that will garner favor. And so that particular attorney needs $10,000 and also is looking for this particular, and they gave it to me, this particular Cartier watch for his wife.
Wow.
It's a true story. And all of that happened, and all of that went away like he said it would. And so it went from, 138 charges, to 22 charges. And, it went from 66 years down to maybe 5. And so you looked at my wife and I said, money well spent.
Mm-hmm.
And that went on for years. It was a behind the scenes chess game that most people just don't believe exists. I didn't believe exists if I didn't live it. And that was kind of some of the hard things for me to wrap my head around. And it still is to this day. One of my greatest flaws is, I just had an uncomfortable business meeting because I'm so data driven that when people say to me, because I like it, that doesn't really sit well with me. Like, help me understand why we're making a decision or not making a decision based on some sort of data.
Mm-hmm.
And my case wasn't really there. My case was so black and white to them. And that was, you lived in the state, you raised millions of dollars in the state, you paid no taxes in this state, therefore, you're guilty.
Mm-hmm. That's it.
And that was it. And that's it.
That was it. And intent and all those things are out the door on those things. And that's the other thing. You didn't wake up thinking anything about anything that was criminal. That's the incredible part of your story is you were just doing what you were doing, following what you knew from what you had learned. And then all of a sudden you get a knock on the door and the whole world changes. And it's black and white.
The whole world. Yeah, it is. And that's kind of, what I now tell people, I get a lot of these consulting phone calls from high profile white collar guys now. And as much as they want to give me their tears, you know this, that did you send the wire? Was it from your bank account? End of story, sir.
Yep.
Like wire fraud.
Wire
Did
fraud.
you send it? Did you scan it? Did you mail it? Did you stamp it? Mail fraud. Like, I understand that wasn't the intent. You didn't wake up with it. You didn't knock off old ladies at 7. I get all of that. Trust me, I get it.
But did it happen?
The way that did it happen? And if the answer is yes, now it's time to wrap your head around the yes and mitigate what's next.
Well, tell me about the night that you decide that you're going to plea, and it comes to the, because that's a reckoning. I think when you decide you fought it all the way through, and I'm going to do a plea.
Uncomfortable for sure. And I had a really, really, really intelligent attorney that helped me through that process. One of the things that they did for me was they said, hey, we're going to do this in Q4 of the year because no judges' calendars will be full that quarter. And so we're going to make sure that you have all of the last celebrations and holidays with your family. And then we'll walk in January. And as kind of goofy as that might sound to some people, it's a very intelligent scenario.
Yep. Agree. Totally. I had a similar situation, Travis. But it's an odd situation because I was sentenced in November, middle of November, and then I went into prison January 14th. But I went through Thanksgiving and Christmas, and those moments that you have, it's such a weird world because you know that you're stepping into the unknown of prison, but you're grasping for those moments with your family.
Totally grasping. You are 1,000% correct. And I think that's what, well, I know we'll get there later, but I know that's what really guys like you and I reflect back on, from a gratitude perspective. But to answer your question, once you realize you're going to plea, everything becomes pretty finite. What do I really care about? What really matters? How am I going to spend my days? Who am I going to call? Right? Like the time that you spend on the phone with people, and I jokingly say this, we living in Los Angeles and California, you have a lot of time on the road, and you'll love this. When you are sentenced or when you plea, you really decide who you're going to call on your drive home from work.
Yeah.
Because that time is so precious now, right? You're not just going to call up and ramble and talk nonsense with anybody. You're going to spend some really valuable time rolling through as you've got an hour on the freeway and going from all of the important loved ones on a daily basis. Yep.
It's a whole different perspective.
It is.
Take inventory a whole different way.
Yeah, you do.
So, was it a surprise to you with the amount of time that you got when they came down with the sentence? How did that roll out to you?
Total surprise, 100%. Up until this point, I was told by everybody it was just going to be a monster fine and probation. Most people said they wouldn't drag it out this long. I had all these excuses. But when I got into the courtroom, everything changed. There was a palpable spirit in that room. I talk about that quite a bit. I think if those pews, those wooden benches, those rickety wooden benches could talk, they start to take souls one by one as the gavel is banged. And on January 20th, 2012, that was my particular fate. I stood in front of that judge, and the judge had decided to use my entire pedigree against me. All of the intelligence, the ability to articulate a story, the ability to hire attorneys and have attorneys on staff, the amount of money that I raised, my age, my schooling. And because of that, he rolled it all up and said, I'm going to make an example out of you. And he sentenced me to 2 years in the Arizona Department of Corrections that day right there. Remanded immediately. Immediately. I had no conversation with my wife as they put those handcuffs on me for the first time and last time in my life. I had no conversations with my wife other than looking across that chasm of a courtroom, and trying to be stoic and just letting her know, hey, I'm going to be okay. And I love you. And that was our final conversation.
Wow, Travis. That would, I didn't have that happen. I had, the sentencing, and then I had a couple of months to wonder where they were going to send me, and then standing at the gates. But you went from that courtroom. Walk us through what happened after that, because that had to have been,
Man,
I don't know what that would have
shock.
been.
Yeah, it was complete shock, to be honest. Prison takes every bit of your dignity with it. It starts during that intake process. My very first concern, I remember in that courtroom, our little guy had literally just been born, weeks prior to that. And my first question to my attorney was, when am I going to see him?
Mm-hmm.
And she was kind enough to kind of, touch my hand, my right hand, as they put the handcuff on my left hand. And she said, you'll see them often. And it was all just a blur. It was so fuzzy. It was such a blur. And I remember, them taking me out of that courtroom, and the first thing they do is, take apart your person, give me the phone that you came in with, the keys of your car, go back to your wife. And that moment for you where you're like, man, my wife is literally on the other side of that door.
Yeah.
As they're giving her my property. They take the suit that I was wearing that day that I thought would garner some sort of favorable outcome for me, that didn't. And each thing that you came in with, physically, mentally, emotionally, they start to take from you at that point. And I was walked back there, and they, took me down 3 or 4 flights of stairs in 3 or 4 flights in an elevator, and put me into the old white paddy wagon van, and it was off to jail for intake.
Yeah, you're right. And it is, they do prisonize you. I always say to people, it's like you can almost feel your freedom coming off your skin. It just has that feel to it. That dignity, that you then become a number, and you become part of that world. What was your first day like walking into that world of the unknown?
So the first day into the prison yard was, I'd spent about 3 weeks in intake, which was just a horrible condition. They don't let you outside. You don't see the light of day. You're not making phone calls. The only communication that I had was with like a really slim, like number 2 writing pencil that was like broken in half. And so I started to jot some things down in hopes that I could use it as like a cathartic experience. But you have no contact. And I'm in this cell, this 10 by 20 cell with 1 sink and 1 toilet. I believe there was 17 of us that were in there. And I remember the 17 because 3 of them slept on the floor on like a makeshift bedroll. And so we were there for almost a month. And so being transported to a prison yard, I tell everybody, if you have a choice, don't go to jail, go to prison.
Exactly. There's such a big difference.
It's huge. As stupid as that sounds, jail is just horrible conditions, the worst clothing, the worst guards. It's like it's a cattle turnstile, right?
Yeah.
But on the prison yard, at least you have some, like you get some guys that are never going home, and so they treat it like a house. Take your shoes off, say yes, say thank you, ask nicely. But walking or driving up to that prison yard, all of them are the same. It's like a scene out of Shawshank. It's like 48 miles to the middle of nowhere because no one's building a prison in any cool town.
Right.
It isn't. And then you're there, and it's, 600 yards of just concrete and barbed wire, and then you pull up to the one gate. Everybody checks the bus, on the bus, under the bus, around the bus, through the gate, on the bus, around the bus, under the bus, and then you're let off, kind of one by one. In my particular city down there were 4 prison yards, and so they wouldn't tell you who was going where until they pulled up. Then they would call you by name, and they'd pull you off the bus. And I learned later, that was based on like security level and amount of time that you had. So my first moment on the yard was going through the Sally Port with kind of your belongings, and the lieutenant giving you your bunk. Here's where you're going to. Here's your room assignment. And I got to that room. There was another white boy on the yard. For those listening, and obviously very political. The whites come up to you and make sure that you're one of them, and then they claim you, and then they tell you where to go, help you to find out where you need to go. And When I got to that room, I didn't want to be in there. Nobody would. And so I was just craving, after that almost month of just being underground in that filth, I just walked outside to the workout yard. And I just looked up at the sky, and I just wanted to feel the sun on my body. And I just stood there for as long as possible.
I saw somebody do that, Travis, exactly what you just described. And he was and still is a very good friend of mine, but he was in the county jail for 16 months and hadn't been outside. And he looked like he'd gotten out of a casket. He was that white, and he's a very dark complected guy, but he took his shoes off, which you never saw anybody take their shoes off on the yard. And he walked in the grass and just looked, like you said, up and just took the sun in. And I can't imagine even what that would feel like after not being 3 or 4 weeks, not being anywhere but inside a cell. I don't know how. I haven't had that happen.
It was, it was intense. And for me, it was that moment where it was like, okay, this is my opportunity to rewrite this. I very, very quickly learned that the yard that I was put on obviously was a very, very minimum yard, probably one of the lowest in the state. And almost everybody was going home at some point. Even if it was 45 years in the future, they still had an end date. Most of them. There was a few lifers on that yard that had been incarcerated for decades, that had just worked their way down to off compound approval and things like that. But that being said, my yard was, I say it all the time, I was fortunate. I was really fortunate in my time, because that yard had a lot of off compound approvals, a lot of work opportunities. And what most people don't understand, not only just like the indictment would freak people out, but almost every state prison has a prison yard or prisoners that have contracts, and those prisoners leave the compound on a daily basis.
Exactly. Yeah.
That freaks people out when you start to tell people, I wasn't good enough to live in my zip code, so they transferred me to your zip code. I wasn't, like I was making 7 figures a year. Now I'm making 7 cents a year.
Yes.
And, I was contributing to the tax base. Now I'm not. There's so many things that really don't make sense about that process. I'll tell you one story that I always giggle about. And if I didn't live it, I wouldn't have believed it. One of the contracts that we had was with the elementary school. Now, you said you have grandkids. That means you have kids, and you've got the 3 daughters. And so for everybody listening to this is a true story in Douglas, Arizona. You can look it up, Google it, go visit it. But we would go and serve lunch. I'm literally, Brent, I promise you, opening chocolate milks for children in my prison orange. I have parents coming into the cafeteria to sit with their children, right? Like, bring your dad to lunch day, or it's your birthday, Sally got balloons and a cake at lunch, or like we do with our children, right?
Yeah.
And a dozen of us are on the campus in our prison oranges. I'm eating slices of pizza and orange slices and chocolate milks with hundreds of children.
Wow.
Every day. And I just I try not to sound so goofy about that, but it's so important for people to understand that this criminal justice system, I say it all the time, didn't fail. It's working the exact way that they wanted it to work. You're talking about a virtual volunteer army of thousands of men that were in that city with me, who worked for the public works department, the sanitation department, the police department, the fire department, the water, the sheriff's office, the school, the mayor's,
all contracted
all contracted for basically for free. They paid us.
Yeah.
I think it was something around 27 cents for an hour. Meanwhile, they've got a federal contract on me for probably $27 an hour.
Exactly.
And I really want to drive that home to people. In order for this system to continue to work, there has to be people like me who get sentenced so that those contracts remain full.
Yes. Well, was that part of in that world that you were in, your strategy of being in prison? Did you have any particular strategy you were thinking, okay, I'm in this unfamiliar world. I want to be Travis. What were you thinking, and how were you walking through all that, Travis?
Yeah, good question. I learned pretty quickly, and I had this guy. His last name was actually Wood, and for those of you listening, that's a political term, for the white people. And he came to me
Which I
pretty
have no idea
quickly,
where
and
that comes from, Travis.
ah,
So like
I couldn't tell you.
woodpecker, or
I'm
I've
sure
never figured that
somebody
out.
will tell us. Somebody will correct us in the comments, right?
Yeah,
Somebody will chirp
right.
at us. He came to me pretty quickly, and he read through my paperwork, which is pretty common. And on this yard, I mean, I my fine was over $3 million, and so that's a big number to most people. And on this yard, that was like a gargantuan number. Most of these guys are just petty criminals and stupid ideas. And so he had ran the yard at that point, and so he looked at me and he said, "All right, Wall Street, like I'm going to take you under my wing, and I'm going to make sure that you're good here, but I want you to teach me this whole money thing."
Fantastic.
And I
I love
thought,
it.
there it is, there it is, there it is. And so it as you know, there's a lot of like Loch Ness monsters in prison.
Yeah.
People who have stories that don't exist.
Yep.
And so I would get guys that would come to me and they'd say, "Hey, like, so are you like a jailhouse lawyer, or like, that type of conversation?" I said, "No, no, no. Like, first of all, it's not have nothing to do with the legal system, but if you want to talk about money, happy to walk it through with you." And so then, in order to get an off compound approval, an OCA, they needed to make sure that you had a high school diploma, and et cetera, et cetera. Well, when my paperwork came back and they were like, "This guy literally has a degree with finance," that coming down from the captain of the yard. It gave me that street credit.
Mm-hmm.
And then what they did, it was just super luck. I had this guy in the yard named Doc, and he ran the education department. He literally had been down since like Peter, James, and John, but he ran the education department. He said, "Hey, I can't get an off compound approval because I'm a lifer, but with your credentials, I'm going to submit you to get an off compound approval. We have a tutor position open at the community college, and nobody else here has credentials. So here you go, it's yours." And I didn't know what that meant at the time until I
Mm-hmm.
got there. And I tell you what, that was a blessing from God.
Oh yeah.
I got off the yard every single day, Monday through Friday.
Mm-hmm.
And I was able to, at this community college, they had 4 yards that would meet there. Not all the yards, of course. People were taking courses and classes, and everything from wood shop to machining, the license plates to finance, everything.
Mm-hmm.
And I started this literally business 101 course with the Small Business Development Center that had a grant there, SBDC. There's a million of them nationally if people want to look them up. And I started this little thing, and I the first thing I wrote down, I said, "Don't buy a cheeseburger with a credit card." And I taught them about credit. Let
Wow.
me talk about compound interest, and let me show you how it works, and let me show you how it could work negatively over here with debt, but how it could work positively over here with investments. And Brent, I promise you, it wasn't, as you know, prison. There's nothing greater than a prison wildfire. But I wasn't in 3 weeks, and they said, "All right, we've got to move you to another class because you've got 150 on your waiting list."
Wow. So that's
Therapeutic.
it's kind of full circle for you too, Travis, because that's before you went in to the finance part, you were teaching that couple of years and getting that fulfillment out of that. That had to be somewhat of an escape for you while you were in prison to be able to do that and give that, fill you up with,
Blessings.
yeah.
Huge blessings, monster blessings. I realized quickly, for those listening that don't know, information and drugs are 2 very powerful things on a prison yard. I didn't have any experience in the latter, but I did have a lot of information. And so when people would come through visitation, my wife would come down every week, Saturdays and Sundays, and visit. And when people would come through visitation, they'd slide over to my table and say, "Hey, my wife brought her 401k. Can you take a look at it?" and then they'd pay me for it, right? Prison commissary.
You were the
style.
Andy Dufresne of Shawshank.
Yeah, right. And then it turned into this Lieutenant Reinhardt. He came and he said, "Hey, I want you to look," And so I realized, exactly to your point, man, this was a huge blessing from God. This was therapy for me. It got my mind engaged every day, and I really realized then that I was informationally valuable to all of these yards. And so, in a sense, it really insulated me.
Sure. Is that what was rolling through your head when you were going and walking through all this? Did you start thinking about, wow, this could be something as I walk out of here to create a world that needs to be, and I've got now the street cred of being here, I'm going to be out there. What did that start working in your mind as you were in prison?
I realized that, financial literacy, I looked at prison like a problem, and as a business solution versus problem. And I knew that, let's look at it like Amazon. If there's no packages, there's no money. If there's no people, there's no money. The prison system really, if you start to unwind it, the dirt that's owned and the buildings that are built upon it and the beds that are placed in it, those are all contracts. Mm-hmm. So those have to be full in order for this to get an ROI to pencil. And that might sound callous to those people who are listening to this, but it's really the truth. And so I thought, okay, well, why are people coming here? If 80 some, I think it's like 87% of people after 10 years come back, right? Mm-hmm. The recidivism rate's 8 out of 10. It's crazy. And then if Delta Airlines fell out of the sky 8 out of 10 flights on a daily basis,
it wouldn't work. Yeah.
Wouldn't
like
work.
Dropping babies at a hospital. You can't be 8 out of 10 good.
No. How's your OBGYN? 22% success. Yeah, wait, what? So yeah, it's not a good thing. And so then you go, okay, well, wait a minute. If this is an industry that thrives on like poor outcomes, if you will, mm-hmm. and then not only do they thrive on it, but they make more money off of it. Mm-hmm. Like, what in the heck is going on here? And so I learned then, as I would start to talk to these guys, like, what's your barrier to entry when you get out? Mm-hmm. And it always, not always, but 8 out of 10 times it came down to some sort of financial component.
Sure.
I can't get a job because of this. I can't get a car because of that. I can't open a bank account because of something, right? Mm-hmm. And so the simplest thing to do is, like, Johnny is not a car enthusiast. That's not why he stole the 6 Shelby Mustangs. Johnny's a crackhead.
Right.
Right. He doesn't have a vehicle in the Barrett Jackson auction. So
right.
and so then you go, like, okay, well, if I can alleviate some of that financial burden and maybe walk you out with a blueprint, like, do you think that could help you not come back here? Mm-hmm. And the answer was just a resounding yes. And so I started very simply with FICO score. I'll never forget one of the funniest things, and it was halfway in jest and halfway serious. I had just started the FICO course to talk about their credit scores, and I was working out that day, and I remember these 2 Mexican guys, and I don't say that disparagingly, but these two Hispanic guys came up to me, and they said, "Yo, man, I know that you're talking about FICO. Like, we know that, homie." And I'm like, I don't think we're talking about the same FICO. So it was just funny. I realized then, obviously, it was such an honest moment for me of authenticity to go, guys, like, FICO's a company. It's an acronym. It was started in San Francisco. Never mind. Like, yeah, that's yeah. So it was good. And so it started there, and I never thought it would grow into what it is. I definitely did blueprint life 2.0. I definitely, when Melissa would come down on the weekends, I would say, okay, I'm going to turn this mess into a message. I'm going to figure out, how do I
turn the mess into a message. And the other thing, Travis, that I don't want to gloss over, because it's such a big deal and so few have it. You and I were very, very lucky prisoners. And it's not, it's a strange thing to say, a lucky prisoner, but we both had wives that came to visit us every weekend. That was so uncommon, because so many guys literally lost complete touch with everything. That That had to have been, I mean, and I look at, my wife, Julie, she was the glue that kept our family together. Cause I
Yeah.
always say, when somebody goes to prison, the family goes to prison because they have to figure out,
Hmm.
how does that work? How do we do this? And your wife had to have been rock solid to walk through that. And the thing that I see too is by her coming, she was able to plug into your world that was so unfamiliar, but you were plugging back into the outside world. So you got to sit on the fence, the two of you, for a little while. And that's not great, but it sure is better than not having it at all.
Oh, brother, you truer words have never been spoken. You're right. As you know, that visitation room was few and far between, right? With loved ones, with a lot of parents, but very few significant others,
Yeah.
wives like ours, who my wife made a 5-hour trip, one way, twice a week with a 6-month old.
Yeah.
And I joke all the time, not a grocery store trip goes by where the cashier doesn't separate Melissa and I's groceries with that little plastic divider thing, because nobody can believe that she's with me.
That's hilarious. I have never heard that before.
Happens to me all the time. So no, it is. I mean, I outkicked my coverage with her. I mean, she's truly, like you said, rock solid. There's not a better one of my
Well,
chapters.
that
Is
means
called My
you're a
Rock.
closer, Travis. That means you're a closer.
I
That's a good
am.
thing.
I
Okay, so you do this in your world here, and you realize that you've got something. You get 6 months, to the door, and you start. Something kind of changes in your world because you don't think about it as much as to the point where you're
Yeah.
like, I'm getting out. What was going through your mind of, okay, my next step? How were you feeling? What were you thinking? What was going through your mind?
Man, I was just so hungry to hit the ground. And once I got that date, I'll never forget that phone call sitting in the counselor's office and telling Melissa, like, I got a date. Here it
Such
is.
a big deal because you don't think they'll give you one.
So big, so big. And my sentence was 2 years, and then Arizona had like a 80, I think it's 85% good time. I'm sure someone will correct me, 80% maybe, and then then I had like 90 days worth of good. So your date fluctuates, and then it's
Mm-hmm.
always like if you carried the one and you didn't get in trouble, and then you actually get all this good time. But still, until you get that date, it's you're on pins and needles. And I remember they said, yeah, you can call her. So I called her and I said, man, here we go. We got this date. And I was so hyper focused from that time forward on making sure that when I got out, it was just like militant. I wanted to make sure we had a routine. I wanted to know where we were going, what time I was waking up, what I was doing. And everything was focused on the goal and the dream of taking this story to the world. I knew I had to take it to the world. I didn't know how, but I didn't care what got in my way to do it. I had to take it to the world and show people. Number one, everybody deserves a second chance. And number two, every human in this world is full of a story that can unfold to redemption.
Yeah. So true. So true. So tell me, what was the day like you walking out? Finally
it was
walking out the doors.
glorious. Oh my gosh, it was glorious. I was in the greatest shape of my life. My clothes didn't fit that my wife dropped off. It was freaking awesome. My wife was there. It was just magic. You know what? I remember this one thing that really like pierced my heart right before I left. I was sitting in the cell with the other guys that were going home, and this guy, this older gentleman, he had been down for 40 years at that point. And he pulled out his debit card. They give you kind of going home money, $50, $100, whatever you've got on your. And he pulled out his debit card, and he was somber. He was a little choked up. He was a little scared, and he said, "I can't tell you what it means to me for you to teach me how to use this thing."
Wow, that kind of makes.
I was like,
that's kind of emotional
man,
just to think about that.
So emotional, and I just thought, goodness, it was that moment right before I left that I went, okay, God, what do you got for me here? Like, what is it? What's next? And that, man, it was incredible. And so my wife came and picked me up, assimilating, back into the real world is weird. The
Mm-hmm.
last thing that anybody wants to do is go to a mall or a restaurant, after you've been told not to disrespect people and not to stand in front of people and not to talk close
It's
to
sensory
people. All
overload.
these, oh my
Yeah.
word, it's crazy. So we went and we got a hotel. My mom watched our little guy for that weekend. We went and got a hotel and just reconnected. Spent the weekend together, talking about what the plans were going to be, what they were going to look like. I think I had 3 days before I had to check in with probation,
Yeah.
and then it was off to the races. It was time to figure out what life was going to be.
Well, Travis, you've done a lot. So tell us what's going on now in your world. How did you get to where you're at with what you're doing?
Crazy, unrelenting, just desire. I mean, I tell people all the time, my crime was for millions of dollars, and I was incredibly fortunate and all that other stuff. But the reason I tell you that is when I got out, I had to have a job. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how much money you have in the bank. It doesn't matter what business you've got. These probation officers have to check a box, and
Yep.
they want you to have a job with a W-2 or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And so I hustled during the day to try to get my story out, tell my
Well,
story, get in
Travis,
front of
I was
magazines.
gonna I was gonna say on some of that, they don't allow you to work for yourself. I mean, it's part of some of the supervisions say you can't work or create a job, but
Correct.
you got to work for somebody. So there's some limitations
Correct.
some people are even put on that.
No, you're 100% right. You really are. There's a lot of barriers to entry.
Yeah.
And so I found this bread company, and they would let me work there at nighttime. I would stack bread trucks so that I had a quote unquote job.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd go there from like 9 or 10 p.m. to like 5 or 6 a.m. And I would do that all during the week so that I had this W-2 job. And then aside from that, it was back to building the business, back to investing, back to going to my old contacts, letting them know that I was home, seeing what opportunities were out there. But first and foremost was really telling my story about Accomplished and trying to figure out how to take this nonprofit and set the world on fire.
Mm-hmm. That's so. And the amount with what you did and what you're doing now, how difficult was it to get into the world that you would have been in, to make those connections, to have this big idea that you wanted to basically create an education world inside the walls? Was it a hard sell? Was it an easy sell? How did that work for you?
It was crazy hard. The first year, I mean, they want you to prove a model on a concept, which basically bleeds you dry. So they'll say, sure, we'll take your program, we'll take your content, your curriculum for free. We'll test
Mm-hmm.
pilot it, around the country. We'll give you data and feedback if we can remember to give you the data and feedback.
Yeah.
And when we do, then we'll talk about maybe some sort of revenue sharing model, or maybe like there's zero promises. It's 100% risk, and they want you to put up all of the equity and the capital in order to do it. So the barrier to entry is crazy high. I tell people that all the time. Like, when I get the inmate letters that say, "Oh, I want to do what you want to do," and it's like, I would love for you to. I hope that you have enough, gumption and money in the bank to run for the next 12 months for free.
Mm-hmm.
But once I was able to do that, then, as guys like us are the anomaly of coming out of prison. Most of them are inked up and have an addiction and are, a little bit sideways and, still love to eat ramen noodles in their kitchen for some weird reason. But so when you and I are able to get in front of a room or articulate an email or have an opportunity to shoot our shot, more often than not, we're successful because, who came before us was, like the guy on heroin, So for me, I wanted to make sure that when I stepped into a room that people understood that I was doing this from a place of empathy. And most of the time I got in the room to talk with DOCs, they would think that I was legal counsel. They didn't think that I was a former inmate. When I got out and I was, really yoked up, they thought I was Aryan Brotherhood. But
Of
then
course.
then as you're right, then it turned into like legal counsel because I didn't have any tattoos. So it was that situation. And so I thought, you know what, if I can articulate a story and the barrier to entry is low, then why wouldn't I just jump on LinkedIn and start cold calling some of these, wardens and lieutenants and captains and saying, hey, I've got a program here that stems from financial literacy, and I'd love to have it on your yard. How do we do that? And
Mm.
that's where it started. Most people came back and they went, I don't even know how to do that.
Yeah.
And some of them said, I don't want to try. And some of them said, hey, let's figure it out together. But what I've learned is that like, for example, when you get Arizona on board, then it's easier to point to Nevada, because
Sure.
they can just say, hey, call your buddy over there, and they'll tell you what I did. So that's been fun.
I just think it's so cool what you've been able to do. And I know that you've gone back into prisons to speak. What's that like?
Yeah, hundreds of them at this point. During COVID, I was doing it kind of on a weekly basis. There was really no volunteers allowed in, and so they didn't have programming. And so I would go in and kind of travel the country and speak inside. It was beautiful. A lot of my stuff that I try to do with the inmates that are currently incarcerated, because they go, oh, we just want you to speak. There's really no guidelines. But I start with identity, and I walk them through, like, you've been in a situation, an environment where you've been told what you can't do and what you shouldn't do and what you shouldn't be and what you can't be. But the reality of the situation is you are a miracle to be here, and you are deserving of greatness. That's what I really want. And then I walk them through, like, your programming really changes your belief system. The happiest animal in the world is a goldfish, because they have a 10-second memory.
Yeah.
And so when you walk out of here, I want you to remember that you've been programmed into a belief system. Those belief systems will create feelings. Those feelings will turn into actions, and then actions actually turn into results. But motivation doesn't get you anywhere.
Right.
You can write all the cute quotes on the mirror, and your wife can remind you every day and send you cute text messages. But you've got to be programmed with a belief system that says you can't win, you deserve to win, you're going to win. So when I talk to the inmates that are inside, that's usually my narrative, is that here's who you are, here's who you're made up of.
Mm-hmm.
And what's been interesting for me since 2019, 2020, is that my message, my incarceration message, that identity message, has resonated more with the younger generation, the youth of tomorrow,
Mm-hmm.
than any other kind of genre that I've spoken to. I've been asked to speak at more schools because of the suicides, the vaping addictions, the bullying, where these kids of tomorrow, they're lost.
Yeah.
If they don't have a screen in front of them, they don't have a dopamine reaction. If they're not being applauded or given a plastic trophy for coming in 19th place, they don't feel like they're worthy. And so my message, which has been interesting, of going through this adversity, is taking it to the kids. And after I walk the youth through identity, I walk them through adversity, because I believe that life is supposed to be hard, not easy.
Yep.
We as parents, this, we try to make it easier for our children.
Sure. Yeah. And I think
life is supposed to be hard.
It's supposed to be hard. And I think that we're dangerously getting close to the cliff of this victimhood of a nation, that everybody's victims. And there's such a big difference in being a survivor that gives you strength to step through, to believe in the mindset that you're talking about, Travis. Mindset can change just about anything, because what it means is you're willing to step out of your comfort zone and step into the unknown, which is fearful. And you're not sure, but if you keep stepping, you gain confidence. And that's, if you're a victim, you have a harder time doing that than survivor step. And whatever that strength, that inner grit is what we've got to instill in these guys and these gals, because that's what gets you through. You can't get through it getting in a fetal position in the corner and saying, oh, poor me. Because you got to make a difference regardless if life's unfair, right?
Yes. No, you're totally right. A mind stretched by new experiences never goes back to its former dimensions. It's a good thing to be stretched and to be stressed.
I like that. So, Travis, tell me, after you've gone through all that you've gone through, what do you think is your biggest takeaway for throwing it back out there to the listeners? What would you say about the journey that you've been on that you would share your takeaway?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest takeaway for me is that, for everybody listening, myself included, you hold the pen. We write the script, and you have the opportunity to change the story. The negative self-talk that I think exists in our world, you say it in the intro to your show. The worst prisons of America aren't the concrete and steel. It's the identity and the mindset that keeps people locked in a life of mediocrity.
Right.
I think that when you really start to unpack that, when you're brushing your teeth at night, you start judging yourself. When you look at the messy house and women think that they're a failure as a mom, like all those little self-defeating thoughts, those limiting beliefs, that guilt, that shame, it builds up into a person that really doesn't know themselves when they wake up in the morning. And I think that prison is some of the dangerous prisons that we have in society. And so I tell everybody, you hold the pen. It is literally your opportunity to write your own script. I really, really want everybody to focus on that. Like your belief system in yourself that maybe came from a childhood of trauma, maybe came from adulthood of addiction, maybe came from a significant other that didn't love you enough. I don't know, but I don't want to take that away from you. What I do want to give to you is that you have to use your belief system to propel you to a place that you've never been to before. And that all comes from inside you. It doesn't come from
Yeah.
motivational quotes. It doesn't come from Amazon books. It doesn't come from YouTube videos. It comes from inside you. And you've got everything inside of you to be great.
Man, love that. Travis, I'll tell you what, man, you are doing some incredible stuff. It's so fun to have somebody on. And what I like about this platform is everybody went to prison, but everybody's story is different. And what they do with their experience is up to you. And what you're doing with your experience and basically changing for the good of something that, my gosh, needs to be changed. And you're feeding that system, and you've got people that are grabbing onto it as a life jacket. And man, just keep if we could clone Travis here and make 1 million of you, we'd be a much better place. For everybody out there, if you're looking for a book, I wrote one, Nightmare Success. You can get it on Amazon, Barnes and Noble. The likes, share if you can, and love the comments on social media. If you want to make any comments to me, go to brentcassity.com. Love the reviews on Apple. You hit those little 3 dots up there. It drops down, tells you what to do. As I used to say to the people when I was writing back from my little cubicle thing in prison on Core Links on my email, stay strong, and I'll do the same. Nightmare Success in and out. Travis, thank you very much. Travis Richey.
I appreciate you, brother. Have an awesome day.